My name is Kaylee, and one of the most asked questions on my channel is about the out of Africa theory. And there are many people who claim that it's an impossible and baseless theory. So these people who claim that the out of Africa migration theory is false seem to not be well educated on the matter, especially since it wasn't just one out of Africa migration that occurred in ancient times, but there were multiple migrations that occurred over time. So in this video, I am going to explain the out of Africa migrations so that you can share this video with people who either don't understand the out of Africa scientific theory or those who don't believe in it. But before we continue delving into our fascinating journey through human migrations out of Africa, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor for today's video, Planet Wild. But stick around until the end because I've got something excited to share with you about how you can join me in making a difference for our planet. Now let's get back to uncovering the mysteries of our past. So the reason why species migrated out of Africa have a lot to do with changes in the climate and environments where these species emerged. So when fertile lands emerged in places near where a species first emerged, they followed the fertile land and therefore migrated throughout Africa and out of it. There is something that I would like to note. And that is that new evidence from a couple places in Eurasia and some on the Indian subcontinent that date back to between 2.5 and 1.66 million years ago are very important. These sites suggest much earlier migrations than we thought possible up until now out of Africa. But there isn't too much information about these locations, and the oldest dates are from sediment layers containing stone tools, but not fossilized remains. The layers with fossilized remains are much younger, are more towards the 1.66 million years old and not the 2.5 million years old. As most of you watching me will know is that Homo habilis emerged around 2.5 million years ago, possibly even as far back as 2.7 million years ago. So Homo habilis may have actually been not only the very first species in the Homo genus, but may have also been the very first species in the Homo genus to have traveled outside of Africa. Or it is a possibility that Homo erectus emerged much earlier than we currently think possible. At least we haven't found tangible evidence of Homo erectus emerging hundreds of thousands of years earlier than we currently have evidence of. But of course, as you can imagine, that doesn't make it impossible. It's always a good thing to remember that the fossil record that we currently have is a bit of an incomplete story, because conditions must have been perfect for remains to be fossilized, and this is not always the case. Fossils are quite rare. Climatic conditions have a lot of influence on remains. As an example, in a rainforest climate, it is extremely difficult for remains to become fossilized. This has everything to do with the humidity and the amount of rain throughout the year. This rain causes rapid decay of dead organisms. So, bad conditions to become fossilized. The absolute best conditions for remains to become fossilized is if they were buried immediately and completely in a swamp or a lake, and cold and dry climates are the second best conditions. Because of all of this, only a very, very small fraction of the primates and hominins that have ever lived have been preserved as fossils. So our fossil records are incomplete, therefore. So let's take a look at some of these locations where we have found evidence of human migration dating back to at least 2 million years ago. We'll start in China at the Shangqian Paleolithic Archaeological Site, which suggests that Homo erectus or even Homo habilis or an Australopithecine inhabited the area in Lantian County, Shanxi in China some 2.12 million years ago. The discovered fossils at the site have been given the name Lantian man. The first of these fossils were discovered back in 1964 and date back to 1.63 million years ago. Like I said, it's the sediment layers in which we found the stone tools dating back to 2.12 million years ago. So, like I just mentioned, the oldest artifact-bearing layer at the site dates back to 2.12 million years ago. This could mean that Homo erectus migrated out of Africa earlier than thought, or that Homo habilis migrated out of Africa into Asia, which no one would have thought. Or one of the later Australopithecine species migrated out of Africa into Asia, which also no one had even suggested up until now. But that one is also less likely to have happened. So the most well-known Paleolithic sites dating back to 2.5 and 1.66 million years ago are Yiron in Israel, Dmanisi in the country of Georgia, Riwat in Pakistan, Mesol in India, Lungong in Malaysia, Lungudon, Renzidon and Longkupo in China, and Mojokerto in Java. Java being the Indonesian island, of course. All these sites have stone tools, bones with cut marks, and human remains. But the human remains are not found in the sediment layers with the oldest dates. Stone tools, however, are found in those layers. So it is really quite clear that the first Homo species evolved in Africa and migrated to Asia shortly after they first emerged. So the species in our Homo genus that came long before us were equally as curious and adaptable as we are. It's actually where we all got it from. Our curiosity for new environments and pushing ourselves to the limit is in our genes. The genes that were passed down for more than 2 million years before our own species even emerged. The early out of Africa migration of Homo erectus around 1.9 million years ago has been proposed to be related to the Saharan pump. So what is the Saharan pump theory? It's a hypothesis that explains how flora and fauna could have migrated between Eurasia and Africa via the Levant region. For those who aren't familiar with the Levant region, it's the region of the modern-day countries of Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. In simpler words, the area that connects Africa with the Arabian Peninsula. And as most of you watching this will know, the Arabian Peninsula connects Eurasia to Africa. So the Sahara pump theory hypothesizes that extended periods of abundant rainfall lasting many thousands of years in northeast Africa resulted in a wet green Sahara phase, with large lakes and rivers. As you can imagine, this causes changes in the flora and fauna found in the area. So it is thought that during the time of a Sahara pump, the Sahara Desert and the Arabian Peninsula became a savanna grassland, which are the perfect conditions for species to thrive. As you can imagine, after an extended period of heavy rainfall, there will be a dry and arid period following it. So during the dry and arid periods, the Sahara reverts back to its desert conditions. Big lakes become much smaller and rivers become dry wadis. A wadi is the name for a dry river valley. The abundant flora and fauna retreats northwards to the Atlas Mountains, southwards into West Africa, eastwards into the Nile Valley, northeast across the Sinai and the Arabian Peninsula to Asia, and southeast into the Ethiopian highlands and Kenya. The species that were relying on the flora and fauna dispersed during the changing climatic conditions, which is why we recently discovered that the Homo erectus fossilized remains of Little Garba in the Ethiopian highlands dates back to at least 2 million years ago. This actually suggests the possibility of Homo erectus emerging first in the Ethiopian highlands, or it suggests that Homo erectus emerged much earlier and settled in the difficult climatic conditions of the Ethiopian highlands due to the fact that after a dry period in the climate, which followed the Saharan pump, the individuals in this area became dispersed from the other groups of Homo erectus. So at this point in time, in 2024, the Saharan pump theory is the most likely explanation for the earliest migrations of Homo erectus out of Africa. So let's take a look at the most well-known site of Homo erectus outside of Africa, Dmanisi in the country of Georgia. Not the state in the United States, but the country of Georgia. An archaeological site with fossilized remains of Homo erectus dating back to at least 1.8 million years ago. As you can see, Dmanisi in the country of Georgia is located just north of the Levant area, the area through which Homo erectus would have migrated to leave the African continent. The Dmanisi remains seems to be closely related to Homo habilis, and this shows that this particular group of Homo erectus had emerged not long before they reached the country of Georgia. So as I explained earlier, their ancestors may have become dispersed throughout the landscape in Northeast Africa near the split from Homo habilis and Homo erectus, and because they were dispersed and the surrounding landscape changed, they may have been forced to migrate northeast as they had to follow the flora and fauna into the Levant area and therefore reached Georgia. As we have seen later on in the late Paleolithic and Mesolithic, hunter-gatherers would follow the food, so to speak. So who's to say that Homo erectus was any different from that? It is the most basic instinct that we all have: food and water. They are our driving forces in the survival of our species. So that probably originated way before the species in the Homo genus even emerged. I will of course create a video on the Dmanisi remains in the future, otherwise this video would become 2 hours long if I spoke in length about all of these locations. Homo erectus reached China at least 1.71 million years ago, as evident by fossilized remains found in Yuanmu, southern China. But as I mentioned earlier in this video, Homo erectus may have reached China even earlier. The oldest evidence of Homo erectus on the Indonesian island of Java dates back to 1.66 million years ago. So those are the currently known migration patterns of Homo erectus. They left Africa, either almost directly after they emerged in Africa, or they emerged much earlier, but we simply haven't discovered the fossilized evidence of an earlier emergence yet. Homo erectus is a chronospecies, which means that the species of Homo erectus changed physically, morphologically, genetically, and behaviorally over time. This means that the originating species of Homo erectus could not be classified as the same species of the later Homo erectus individuals had they lived at the exact same time. Because the youngest Homo erectus individuals are so different from the very oldest. With Homo erectus, it is clear that the species itself evolved over time, without becoming a new species, even though Homo erectus had many species branching off from it. Homo erectus is truly the most important ancestral species that we have, as they were the very first to migrate out of Africa as far away as the Indonesian islands. They were without a doubt the most resilient species among our ancestors. The last individuals within the late forms of the species of Homo erectus seem to have gone extinct somewhere between 500,000 and 143,000 years ago. But as I mentioned earlier, there were new species that branched off Homo erectus over time. One of these species is Homo antecessor, who lived in Europe between 1.2 million and 800,000 years ago. Homo heidelbergensis is another species that branched off Homo erectus approximately 700,000 years ago in Africa and spread through East Africa and migrated to Eurasia around 600,000 years ago. Homo heidelbergensis is considered to be the last common ancestor between Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens. You know, us, modern humans. Homo heidelbergensis disappeared somewhere around 200,000 years ago. It's also very likely that Homo floresiensis in Indonesia is a descendant of Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis being the hobbit species. The species of Homo floresiensis is only found on the Indonesian island of Flores. Since they have very archaic features, it is believed that their ancestors were among the very first to migrate out of Africa. As I mentioned near the beginning of this video, the first Homo erectus individuals to have arrived on the Indonesian island of Java was 1.66 million years ago. It's not strange to assume that these Homo erectus individuals also started to inhabit the island of Flores, and therefore Homo floresiensis branched off from their ancestral species, as they eventually evolved to the climatic conditions of this Indonesian island. I would like to mention that there are some anthropologists who are of the belief that Homo floresiensis morphology looks a lot more like Homo habilis than erectus, and that floresiensis is a descendant of Homo habilis, or a descendant from the same ancestor of Homo habilis. These are all plausibilities, and I'm not the one to make any conclusive statements. So let's continue. As I mentioned earlier, Homo heidelbergensis is considered to be the last common ancestor of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens. Neanderthals seem to have emerged around the Levant area. Their remains have been found all over Europe, Southwest Asia, the Levant area, as I just mentioned, in Uzbekistan and in the Altai Mountains in Central Asia. Denisovans emerged around Central Asia, it seems. Most of the Denisovan remains were found in the Denisova cave in the Altai mountain region. But there was the discovery of a molar that possibly belongs to a Denisovan in the country of Laos in the Annamite mountain region. Over time, it seems that Denisovans migrated towards Oceania. At least the people living in Oceania in modern times have a high percentage of Denisovan DNA within their genomes, just like Europeans and people from Asia have a high percentage of Neanderthal DNA within their genomes. Homo sapiens, us modern humans, emerged around 300,000 years ago near Jebel Irhoud in Morocco. Well, at least the oldest known Homo sapiens fossils were found there. A Homo sapiens skull, known as the Florisbad skull, discovered at Florisbad in South Africa, dates back to approximately 259,000 years ago, and the Homo sapiens remains known as the Omo remains from Omo Kabish in Ethiopia date back to around 200,000 years ago. This shows that our own species of Homo sapiens spread quite quickly throughout the African continent. It seems that our own species had left Africa quite early on as well, as anthropologists reported the discovery of Homo sapiens remains in the Apidima cave in southern Greece dating back to 210,000 years ago. The Homo sapiens remains that they discovered here have a mixed morphology of modern human and archaic features. It is unclear why these early Homo sapiens left Africa, and so far it's also unclear if they managed to survive out of Africa at the time or if they were assimilated into other species living in the area at the time. In the same cave, the researchers also found a Neanderthal skull from approximately 170,000 years ago, which could suggest that Neanderthals were living in the region at the time the early Homo sapiens arrived in the area. There are a few instances where we have found evidence of early Homo sapiens leaving Africa towards Eurasia, but these earliest migrations didn't last, or the Homo sapiens migrated back into Africa. There have been instances where the Homo sapiens who migrated back into Africa had mixed with Neanderthals in Eurasia and therefore brought that Neanderthal DNA back with them into Africa. The earliest known successful out-of-Africa migration of Homo sapiens occurred around 120,000 years ago, as they migrated through the Arabian Peninsula into Southeast Asia. Eventually, some of them migrated towards the Southeast Asian islands towards Oceania, where they reached the modern-day Australian shores some 65,000 years ago. Another wave of a successful migration of Homo sapiens occurred around 55,000 years ago through the Levant area, where evidence has been found that Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals in that region. Some of these Homo sapiens migrated towards Central Asia, while others migrated towards Europe. In all of these locations, Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals, and if they lived in an area with Denisovans, they interbred with Denisovans as well. I would like to quickly mention one thing. In the past, I have made a video about the fact that all humans alive today are descendants of 3 African populations of Homo sapiens who dispersed roughly between 60,000 and 50,000 years ago. Many people were mad at me in the comments of that video, even though I didn't do the research, but I just made a video on it. Because as I just mentioned in this video, Homo sapiens reached the Australian continent 65,000 years ago. So they were mad because they said it was impossible for those Aboriginals to carry the DNA of those 3 populations from Africa, dating back younger. But both these things are the truth. The bottleneck event still occurred. We all carry the DNA of those 3 populations within us, even the Aboriginals in Australia. Because when the later Homo sapiens arrived in Australia around 45,000 years ago, who carried that DNA from these 3 populations within them, they interbred with the first arrived Homo sapiens who were already living on the continent for 20,000 years. Their DNA mixed, and therefore the Aboriginals in modern times also carry the DNA of the 3 African populations. Our own species of Homo sapiens inhabited all corners of Eurasia, Africa, and Oceania by 32,000 years ago. We also have found evidence of Homo sapiens having reached the American continents at least 24,000 years ago, because of the discovered footprints at White Sands in New Mexico. The Gault archaeological site in Texas is also evidence of humans settling on the North American lands by at least 20,000 years ago. So our own species of Homo sapiens have been inhabiting all continents except for Antarctica for at least 24,000 years ago. And yeah, we couldn't have settled on Antarctica because it's been covered in ice for a couple million years now. Impossible for us to have lived there before now that we have these bases and made it able for humans to survive there. Our species lived as hunter-gatherers, following the food sources throughout the lands. As the climate changed, our species had to constantly adapt to new environments, new flora and fauna. And then around 8,000 years ago, Doggerland, the landmass in northwestern Europe, disappeared beneath the waves of the North Sea. And this resulted in another migration in Eurasia that had quite a ripple effect on the hunter-gatherer communities who were living there at the time and the animals that they hunted for food. By this time, the Anatolian farmers in Turkey had already discovered how to farm, and they were actually slowly spreading throughout Eurasia. This resulted in a change in how these communities lived, and slowly but surely our species went from the nomadic lifestyle of hunter-gatherers to the farming lifestyle, living in one location. We created larger communities, and eventually over time the first civilization emerged in the fertile valley between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers in modern-day Iraq. We humans are an extremely resilient species, and we Homo sapiens, modern humans, could never have become this resilient or adaptable if it wasn't for the species of Homo erectus that came before us. They were the original pioneers, domineering the landscape. They lived on this planet for more than 2 million years, and we Homo sapiens are still a young species compared to them. But we are the evolved version of them, which is something none of us should ever forget. So there we have it, the Out of Africa scientific theory explained in one video. All species that ventured out into the rest of the world, how the climate affected these species and was most likely the driving force behind these migrations. You know, exploring our past also makes us reflect on our future and making a difference. And speaking of which, have you heard of Planet Wild? They are a movement, a community dedicated to protecting our planet. Each month, they partner with different projects across the globe to conserve endangered species, clean up oceans, and restore ecosystems. It's like crowdfunding for nature, but with real, tangible impact. And the best part, you can join this movement right now, from wherever you are. So why should you consider becoming a member of Planet Wild? Well, for starters, it's for you. Yes, you, who believe in taking action now rather than waiting for change to happen. You will be able to see where your contributions are making an incredible difference as they document all their work on their YouTube channel, ensuring 100% transparency. In their latest mission, they're helping protect the world's smallest bear from extinction by creating a human foster family for rescued cubs. The approach is surprising and kind of genius. And Planet Wild's got an app. As a member, you'll get to vote on projects, read reports, and connect with like-minded people on Discord. Their membership starts at just $6 a month. Plus, you can cancel anytime, no strings attached. The first 200 of you to head over to their website and use code Kaylee will receive the first month for free. Join us in making an impact. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen, and let's make a difference starting today. And if you're curious to learn more about Planet Wild and their current mission, check out the video linked in the end card. Trust me, it's inspiring stuff. So what do you think of my explanation on the Out of Africa migrations? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed watching, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you like to see more of these kind of videos, and click that bell icon if you want to be notified whenever I upload. If you haven't seen my previous videos yet, then click the card in the upper right corner, or click one of the links in the description down below, or click a video in the end card. I would also like to say a massive thank you to all my patrons and my channel members. Thank you so much for supporting me. It truly means the world to me. And yeah, with that said, I'll see you in the next video.